Some murder cases go cold and stay cold forever, or so we think. But in recent years, breakthroughs in DNA technology, relentless detective work, and even social media have solved murders once thought unsolvable. Today, we'll uncover 10 chilling cases where justice was served, sometimes decades later. You're about to step into the world of real crime with real endings. Between 1974 and 1986, a shadow moved across California. Unseen, unknown, and unstoppable. More than 13 people were murdered. Over 50 women were assaulted. More than 100 homes broken into. The state was paralyzed with fear. They called him many names: the East Area Rapist, the original Night Stalker. But eventually, one name would come to define the monster: the Golden State Killer. His terror began in the suburbs of Sacramento. He targeted couples, breaking in at night. The man would be tied up, helpless. Then, in the next room, unspeakable horrors. He wore a mask, carried a gun or knife, and often left behind almost no trace. But he didn't stop with the attacks. He called some of his victims, years later, just to whisper a threat, just to remind them he was still out there. For decades, the case went cold, until 2018, when science caught up with him. Investigators turned to a new tool: genetic genealogy. They uploaded DNA from the crime scenes to a public ancestry website called GeneMatch. From that DNA, they built a family tree, generation by generation, until one name surfaced: Joseph James DeAngelo, a former police officer, a man who had been hiding in plain sight for over 40 years. He was arrested in April 2018, at the age of 72. In 2020, DeAngelo pled guilty to 13 murders and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The arrest sent shockwaves across the nation, not just because the nightmare was finally over, but because it showed how genetic genealogy could rewrite the rules of cold case investigations. Justice had finally caught up, and the Golden State Killer was unmasked. In 1986, Sherri Rasmussen was living what many would call the dream life. A dedicated nurse, recently married, and full of hope for the future. But in her Los Angeles condo, that dream came to a sudden and tragic end. Sherri was discovered lifeless, her home in disarray. The initial theory: a break-in gone wrong. The LAPD believed she had surprised intruders, but the details didn't sit right with her family. There were signs of struggle, yes, but many valuables were left untouched. To Sherri's loved ones, the real story seemed far more personal, and one name kept coming up: Stephanie Lazarus, a police officer and John's ex-girlfriend. Still, the case went cold. For over 2 decades, no answers came, until 2009, when a cold case unit took a fresh look. They re-examined a critical detail: an old bite mark left on Sherri. DNA was recovered, and it belonged to a woman. Quietly, investigators put Lazarus under surveillance. They followed her, waited, and eventually collected a discarded coffee cup. The result? A direct match. Stephanie Lazarus, now a veteran detective, was arrested in 2009. In 2012, she was found guilty and sentenced to 27 years to life. The case stunned the public, not just for the betrayal behind it, but for how close the suspect had always been to the investigation itself. Sometimes, the truth hides in plain sight, and justice just takes time to catch up. In 1996, the quiet town of Idaho Falls was shaken by a crime that made no sense. Angie, just 18 years old, was found lifeless in her apartment. The case shocked the community and would go on to expose a tragic flaw in the justice system. The investigation moved quickly. Within months, police had a confession from a local teenager named Chris Tapp, but something wasn't right. There was no physical evidence linking him to the scene. His statement had changed multiple times, and later, it was revealed he'd been coerced. Chris Tapp spent 20 years behind bars for a crime he didn't commit. But outside those prison walls, someone was fighting for the truth. Angie's own mother, Carol Dodge. Carol believed the real person responsible was still out there. She pushed for new DNA testing. And in 2019, 23 years after her daughter's death, science delivered the answer. Using genetic genealogy, investigators identified a new suspect, Brian Drips. They tracked him down, collected a discarded cigarette, and got a match. Drips confessed. He said he acted alone. Chris Tapp was completely innocent. In a stunning reversal, Tapp was exonerated and later awarded a settlement of over $11 million. The case of Angie Dodge is a heartbreaking reminder of how justice can falter and how persistence, especially from a mother, can rewrite a tragedy into a fight for truth. In 1996, Kristin Smart was a freshman at Cal Poly, just beginning her college journey. But one night, after a campus party, she vanished without a trace. She was last seen walking back with a fellow student, Paul Flores. Flores claimed she walked off alone, but Kristin never made it back to her dorm and never contacted her family again. Despite suspicions, no charges were filed. Her body was never found, and for over 2 decades, her disappearance was a haunting mystery. For 25 years, the case sat still, a family left without answers, a campus scarred by silence. But then, something changed. In 2020 and 2021, new witnesses stepped forward, people who had stayed silent for decades. Investigators took a closer look, this time at the home of Paul Flores' father. And beneath the soil, forensic tests revealed something chilling, evidence of human decomposition. Paul Flores was arrested and charged. In 2022, after years of delay, he was convicted of first-degree murder in Kristin's case. Though her body has still never been recovered, justice finally found its voice. Kristin's story sparked change. The Kristin Smart Campus Safety Act was passed, requiring colleges to report safety incidents directly to law enforcement. Her case is a painful reminder of how long justice can take, but also of how persistence, family, and truth can lead the way, even after 25 years of silence. Between 1987 and 1990, a stretch of highway connecting Indiana and Kentucky became the backdrop for a chilling mystery. 3 women, each working at motels off I-65, were found dead under disturbing circumstances. 2 others narrowly survived similar attacks. He struck with speed and precision, moving across state lines, vanishing without a trace. For years, authorities only had a nickname: the Dazen Killer. Despite intense investigations, no name surfaced, just fear and silence. Then, in 2022, over 3 decades later, breakthrough science unlocked the case. Using genetic genealogy, investigators analyzed DNA left behind at the scenes and found a match. The I-65 killer was identified as Harry Edward Greenwell, a known career criminal. But there was a catch. Greenwell had died in 2013, nearly a decade before the discovery. 2 of the surviving victims were shown old sketches. They confirmed it. He was the man who had haunted them for decades. For the families of those lost, it was a complicated kind of closure. Relief in knowing the truth, but no trial, no sentencing, no chance to face the man responsible. The I-65 killer had evaded justice for years. But in the end, science and memory gave these stories the resolution they deserved. In 1992, 25-year-old Christy Mirack was preparing for another day of teaching. Her students were waiting, but Christy never arrived at school. Instead, what followed was a discovery that would send shockwaves through Lancaster, Pennsylvania. She had been found in her home, attacked and killed in a horrifying act that left no clear suspect. For over 25 years, the case remained a mystery, despite countless leads, tips, and heartbreak. Then in 2018, science finally caught up with the past. Using cutting-edge DNA phenotyping, Parabon Nanolabs created a digital sketch of the suspect's likely appearance. The DNA pointed to someone no one expected, Raymond Rowe, a well-known local DJ who performed under the name DJ Freeze. He had been hiding in plain sight. Rowe had even performed at school events and local celebrations, while keeping a deadly secret for decades. When confronted with the evidence, Rowe confessed. He was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. The case of Christy Mirack was more than just a long unsolved crime. It was a reminder that sometimes the answers are hiding in the spotlight. In 1996, the small town of Sitka, Alaska, was rocked by tragedy. Jessica Baggen had just turned 17. After celebrating her birthday, she disappeared into the night. 2 days later, her body was discovered in a wooded area not far from her home. The community was devastated and desperate for answers. In 2000, hope briefly returned when a man confessed to the crime. But DNA testing told a different story. He was innocent, and the trail went cold again. For years, Jessica's case remained frozen in time, until 2020, when genealogy once again offered new hope. Forensic experts traced DNA found at the scene to a man named Steve Branch. Investigators established that Branch lived in Sitka at the time of Jessica's murder. In early August 2020, Alaska investigators visited Arkansas to question Branch and collected DNA sample in connection to a homicide case. Branch denied involvement and refused to provide DNA. After investigators left to obtain a search warrant, Branch fatally shot himself. The Lono County Sheriff's Office concluded it was a suicide. For a case that spanned decades and thousands of miles, justice had finally arrived. And Jessica's memory now lives on, not in mystery, but in resolution. In 1987, Tanya Van Cuylenborg and Jay Cook, a young couple from British Columbia, set out on a road trip to Washington State. It was supposed to be a quick getaway, but they never made it home. Days later, their bodies were discovered miles apart, both found under tragic and violent circumstances. For over 30 years, the trail remained cold. No motive, no suspect, no closure. Then in 2018, a revolutionary tool cracked the case: genetic genealogy. Parabon Nanolabs used DNA from the scene, matching it through a public database to a distant cousin. That family tree led straight to one man, William Talbot II. Talbot was arrested, and in 2019, he was found guilty, making this Washington State's first ever conviction using genetic genealogy. The case not only brought justice to two grieving families, but also changed the course of modern investigations. It was proof that, even decades later, science can give victims a voice. In 1974, 17-year-old Carla Walker was abducted after a Valentine's Day dance in Fort Worth, Texas. She had been in a car with her boyfriend when a man suddenly attacked and dragged Carla away. 3 days later, Her lifeless body was discovered in a drainage ditch near Benbrook Lake. She had been brutally assaulted and strangled. For 50 years, the case remained cold, but Carla's family never stopped fighting for answers. In 2020, modern DNA analysis finally gave them a name: Glenn Samuel McCurley. Investigators posed as genealogy researchers and recovered his DNA from a discarded item. The match was undeniable. When confronted, McCurley broke down and confessed.
How did you kill her? I just choked her.
To avoid the death penalty, he pleaded guilty. McCurley was imprisoned in the Gibb Lewis unit and would have been eligible for parole on March 21st, 2029, but he died on July 15th, 2023. After nearly 50 years, Carla's story finally had an ending, and the strength of her family became a symbol of hope for every cold case still waiting to be solved. On a freezing December night in 1984, 18-year-old Traci Hammerberg was walking home from a party in Wisconsin. She never made it. Her body was discovered in a driveway the next morning. The crime shook the small town, but despite countless leads and over 400 men tested, there was no match, no name, no justice. Then, in 2019, modern science finally cracked the silence. Investigators used DNA from the original crime scene and found a match through forensic genealogy. The name was Philip Cross. He had a long, violent history, but he had died in 2012, never having faced the consequences. When contacted, Cross's children cooperated with investigators. Their DNA helped confirm what the evidence had long held in silence. Though the suspect wouldn't face a courtroom, Traci's family finally had an answer. After 35 years, the coldest of trails was brought to light, thanks to a family's courage and the persistence of truth. These cases show us that no matter how long it takes, the truth has a way of finding light. Whether it's through technology, perseverance, or a single clue, justice can come, even after decades. Let's honor these victims by remembering their names and never losing faith in the pursuit of truth. Which case hit you the hardest, and you want to see more about it? Let us know in the comments. Subscribe for more stories from the dark side of real life. And remember, the truth always finds its way.